Greetings and welcome, everybody, to this week's episode of UC Weekly News. I'm your host, David Danto, and I have my good friend, Tom Arbuthnot, with me. Tom, say hi to everybody. Tell everybody who you are and what you do in the industry.
Yeah, hey everybody, good to be back on, David. I think this is the first time I've been on with the TalkingPointz logo in the background, so excited about
Hey, you
that.
noticed. Oh,
Yeah, I noticed. So for people that don't know, Tom Arbuthnot, I focus on Microsoft UC, Microsoft Teams. I run a community called Empowering Cloud, and we do lots of community research. We have loads of SMEs who do content. We do podcast, we do newsletter. But the idea is basically to educate the community, and we have lots of subject matter experts who kindly contribute to content. So it's hopefully helping people understand Microsoft and the Microsoft ecosystem.
absolutely. And you are obviously one of the experts in the Microsoft ecosystem, which is why I wanted to have a chat with you today. About a week or two after a chat that Dave Michaels and I had with Ilya Bookstein of Microsoft, he very graciously came on and answered a lot of questions about MDEP, the Microsoft, help me say it out loud. The Microsoft
Microsoft ecosystem, devices ecosystem platform. Yeah, MDEP.
Microsoft device. Yeah, right. Okay, I keep. I'm going to remember it.
Has to be. It's IT, so it has to be an acronym, right?
Has to be. I was criticized for not using acronyms on the call with Ilya, but anyway, he answered some really terrific questions about it, and we very much appreciate that. And I want to peel the onion and get into some nuances from your perspective because I think it's very valuable. So MDEP is going to be an open source version of Android that Microsoft is going to produce for all Android-based collaboration systems and other systems that they're doing. That's the very quick version of what it is. Correct? You're comfortable with that as a definition?
Yeah. So the key thing is there's a dedicated team in Microsoft who are building MDEP. So it's not just the Teams team building their Android release. There is a dedicated, quite big team working on this. And as you say, they take the Android open source project, which is anybody can download free of charge anywhere around the world. And then they build their own flavor of that, and then they release it as an operating system. So you can think of it, there are various things that run Android, like billions of devices, but people like in the consumer world, you might know Sonos or Peloton, Meta Quest, smart TVs, Android Fire OS, like they're all based on the Android open source project. And this will be a variant Microsoft are building with a kind of security enterprise type focus.
So staying focused on the UC space right now, it will affect us on video systems that are Android based, that are not Windows based.
Essentially anything Android potentially. So
right.
The way
I was going to go down the list a little bit.
Yeah, the way the Android kind of project works is you build versions for particular chipsets. So it will depend on the vendor running certain chips at first and which chips are supported. But classically, the Android video bars and anything Android all in one, IP phones could run MDEP. So anything that runs Android, controllers, consoles, OEMs could choose to use Microsoft's version of Android on their devices.
Now, we're going to talk a little bit about how it's going to roll out and how it might play out, because I want to do a little bit of speculation here. But before we do that, let's get to the elephant, the gorilla, the whatever you want to talk about that's in the room right now, which is the whole CrowdStrike thing that happened the last couple of weeks, which, if you're flying Delta, you're still in the middle of it right now.
Lots of people are still in recovery. Like the punchline of that, we don't have to go through all the detail, the kind of the what, but like, that requires for a lot of people a physical or virtual machine visit to fix the individual machine. So depending on how you had in terms of outbound remoting is how quickly you can fix that.
So I'm going to be taking both sides of arguments here for most of this conversation. So I definitely want to draw out all of your opinions. But if we're talking about CrowdStrike, Microsoft has to give third parties access to that level of Windows based on antitrust regulations. They can't keep it to themselves. So it can't be that you can't blame Microsoft for being required to provide that level of access. But
this is the tough thing, right? Microsoft took a hell of a media beating for this because the blue screen of death is so well understood, ironically, that when you see that over, billboards and advertisements and hundreds of machines, and the mainstream news outlets got this wrong as well. People like the BBC, it was Microsoft issue downs millions of PCs, and it wasn't Microsoft, it was a third party. As you say, the crux of this is third parties have kernel level access. So most people listening to this this show will obviously understand that, but kernel level is right at the OS, and then you have user space. If something crashes in user space, the OS can recover. If something crashes in kernel space, all bets are off and the machine crashes. And that because CrowdStrike is a security product, it wants to be in the kernel because it can see everything that's going on in the operating system. And as you rightly said there, what happened in around the Vista time frame, like 2000s, Microsoft locked all that off from third parties. And at the time, it was the McAfee's and the Symantec said, whoa, 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 we're security vendors. We need that level of access. They went to the EU Commission and said, this is anti-competitive. Microsoft are locking us out. And so Microsoft kind of said, well, we will give access, but there's a certain level of risk that comes with that. And lo and behold, this is the risk coming to life. Like it was only 1% or less than 1% of Windows PC. So you can kind of make a case for actually it could have been a lot worse. It was only one vendor that caused the issue. There are other vendors out there. Competition is good. Or you can make the case that people like Apple are allowed to lock down their machines so much that they not only your apps run in user space, they sandbox the apps in user space. So they really lock you down, and they're much more stable because of it. So it's a shame for Microsoft that they have to do this, and then they take the media beating when their OS crashes because a third party takes it out.
Yeah. So I'm going to stay away from the whole fairness and blame, and we don't need to beat that horse to death. But it raises a very interesting point. And Dave made this point as well, and I've made it as well. You know, I'm in my 46th year, starting in September, of doing what I do, and I remember when endpoint, you know, video devices, audio devices, when new updates would come out, we would put it in a lab. We would check it. We might skip one or two because we didn't need the new feature. We'd, you know, go past it, go maybe the third one or the fourth one. We had time to work on it. And we live in a world right now where you wake up in the morning and one of the buttons has moved because there's been a new push. And in a world where you're dealing with an agile framework where things happen that fast, zero-day vulnerabilities will pop up. And having everybody on one type of system gives you the ability to immediately push out a security update and fix it. But it's a double-edged sword. And we've sort of experienced the double-edged sword with the CrowdStrike here. Giving them the ability to send out a fix for something that might be coming up protects a whole bunch of machines at once. But if there's a bug, or if they make a mistake, or if it's untested, or if there's a fat finger somewhere, you shut down all of the systems. So in that context, and again, you know, not beating on Microsoft, we know it's not their fault. But in the context of, is it a really good idea to have everybody on the same build? Now let's talk about MDEP. The idea is that Microsoft has rightly said that, you know, with vendor one, partner one having their version of Android, and partner two with theirs, and partner three with theirs, they're pulling their hair out trying to keep it up to speed and compatible with the Windows version and all the features. It's too much work, and they can't lock it down. Their own security people didn't like the quality of that Android, so they're going to create a lockdown secure Android, and at some point force every certified endpoint to be on it, at least the ones that are running MTR on Android. What happens if something like this happens again? What happens if the next MDEP push that everybody is on shuts down a company's video systems and phones and everything else?
Yeah, this is
Android. It's a real double-edged sword. And, you know, it couldn't happen today because all these vendors are on their own platforms. In the future, they won't be. So again, it's good.
Yeah,
not so good.
It's worth talking about. So there's a couple of things there. So like, I mean, obviously there's a ton of Windows out there running all sorts of things. Then there's a ton of Linux and there's a ton of Android, right? We've already kind of solved this as an industry, right? You don't push, and obviously this is where CrowdStrike went radically wrong. You don't push an update to everybody at once. Like this is known solved problem. You phase, you lab, you do 1%, you do 5%, you do 10%, you see what happens. It's not infallible. And occasionally, as you say, you have to make the call that actually there's a rogue threat out there that's super active. We're going to take the risk, the proportional risk of pushing faster. But we've seen this on MTR on Windows, and now with MTR on Android, we have rings, we have phases. We as customers or as tenants can choose at what pace and how fast we do proportions of our machines.
Can I pause you there just for a second?
Yeah.
I want you to keep going, and I don't want to cut you off, but I want you to explain that word rings, because I've seen it in print a few times. I don't think it's been very well defined for people that don't understand it. So if you could just do that and then continue with where you were.
Yeah, really good point. Yeah, so rings are the equivalent of phasing or staging. So if you think about your entire estate as 100% of a pie, you can think of inner rings that are like 5% of the deployment, 10% of the deployment. So we talk about them as well, just Microsoft jargon, I guess. Rings of rollout from the first set to the second set. And we have the same thing with Microsoft patching the Teams like product. You will sit in an early ring where you get early releases, or a later ring where you get the more final GA releases. Yeah,
Excellent.
no,
Thank you.
thanks.
Okay, so
Thanks
I'm
for
sorry,
calling that
continue
out.
your point.
Yeah. So I mean that's the crux of it. Is if everything ran MDEP, which I'm not sure will happen, or everything runs Windows, or everything runs Linux, or everything runs, you still have to patch in a proportional way. Now you can make the case that if more things are running the same operating system, it gets beaten on harder, and it's more likely to be secure because it's beaten on harder. But also, who is more motivated to make sure this goes well? If you think of the CrowdStrike case, a CrowdStrike more worried or a Microsoft more worried? If they get it wrong, they potentially take down all Windows everywhere. Like so they are more motivated. Doesn't mean they're perfect. They're clearly not. But like they are very motivated to not let that happen to the entire estate. Evidently, CrowdStrike in this scenario were a bit less motivated. Depends what you read as to if they even ring and stage and phase their rollouts ever or not. But I'd say you've got to, IT good practice is IT good practice, and wherever we land, you have to stage and phase and ring these rollouts to make sure you don't hit things in the wild that you never anticipated.
Okay, so what we're saying then is the problem that we could be causing by getting everybody on the same platform is mitigated by proper operational procedure.
Yeah, everything is a risk, right? Off is the safest, etc. But like you, just because you have everything on the same operating system doesn't mean you should patch everything at the same time. You should still phase and stage. You absolutely might take a percentage of things down because you get something wrong, but you shouldn't be taking down 100%.
Which would raise the question then, do we want to have, just in terms of classification of rings, do we want a deeper classification? Should MDEP be making MDEP for phones and MDEP for video systems and MDEP for sharing? I mean, should there be different versions as opposed to this one big bundle that we're talking about covering everything? Or am I off base with that?
I mean, the difference between a phone and a video bar, obviously there's different functionality, but the operating system is very similar, right? It's running the OS, it's doing inputs and outputs. So I wouldn't think that would radically change your risk profile, but it depends what the patch is doing.
Okay. Well, that covers the, are we going to shut the whole world down, if we flip the Skynet switch? So we can put that issue aside right now and say that no, we're not going to be too stupid, and we're not going to make the same mistake that we've made now twice so far in global computing. Hopefully that we'll never do the third time, from the same guy, by the way. But people can read
Yes,
that
is a funny story, isn't it?
I don't need to be the start of that. But now let's talk about MDEP in general. What are you seeing in the wild from your partners that you work with and end users that you work with? Is this something that Microsoft wants because it's easier to do, or is this something that customers are asking for, or how do you see this being taken by the industry?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting topic. So, from a customer perspective, there are definitely customers that are unsure about how much they can trust Android, in the sense of there's the Android open source project, then there's the chip maker taking that and adding their drivers and capabilities, then there's the OEM baking their stuff in, then it goes through Microsoft certification, then they get it. So they are taking a dependency on multiple people in that chain. And any one of them gets something wrong, potentially there's an issue. So because by definition, all Teams customers already trust Microsoft, they're probably using Azure, definitely using Microsoft 365. Microsoft is a trusted pair of hands. So in that sense, they can be like, oh, that's one less vendor that I don't fully understand or fully know, and I can trust them. Now, who the OEM is matters there, because there are bigger OEMs with a longer track record, maybe have more trust, and there are newer OEMs where actually they don't have years and years of experience in Android, and maybe I as a customer trust them less than I trust Microsoft. So that's one angle to consider.
And there are also ODMs that are building for the OEM, so it's not necessarily the company you're buying the product from. It could be who they're going out to have it built and then slap their label on.
A very good point. Yeah, exactly. And the wiser customers will understand that as well, which is like, oh, okay, this is your first Android device. Like, where's your team? Where's your security team? How do you update? How do you test? So that's one angle. And then the other angle is Microsoft want a thriving ecosystem of multiple choices. If they can make it easier to say you don't have to spend, hundreds of thousands or millions on an Android team and maintaining your own build and patching and we can take all that off your hands. Then for some OEMs, that's appealing because they're like, oh, great, we'd rather focus on differentiating in the device, the optics, the sound, whatever it is, not the operating system.
Well, if we look at it from the standpoint of status, which is one of the things I always love doing, Microsoft, first of all, MDEP is not out yet. To my knowledge, it's an any day now kind of thing. We're expecting that the Jabra video bar, the Panicast 50 VBS, I got it right this time.
Very good.
It's going to be the first product out. In fact, I'll roll a little bit of B-roll here of me taking some selfie video with that product booting into MDEP.
Yeah, so you've seen it. So I've got a VBS in my office, but I haven't yet got it on MDEP. So it's going through TAP at the moment. It's early phases, but yes, you're right. It's technically pre-release still.
It's supposed to be the any day now release. So I'm still kind of waiting for that. I've already got my notes into the communications team at Jabra saying, you're going to want a third party to validate this. So, here you go. Let me know when you got it. We'll test it. We'll run it through its paces. But all right. So once it's out, and
the funny thing about that is you won't actually see much as a user. Right. It's the operating system. The Teams app remains the same. The user experience remains the same. So all being well, you maybe see a logo or a
quick flash screen at the beginning during the boot that says it, and then that's
yeah.
So if nothing changes, I got that. But so again, I'm giving everybody the benefit of the doubt that we'll have that probably sometime this summer, I hope.
Yeah.
And then sometime toward the end of this year, we've heard that Yealink is going to be releasing their products based on it, and we also had Barco come out and say that they're going to be doing their ClickShare products. So those are the first three big vendors that have adopted it. And according to what we've heard and what we've been told, at some point there's going to be a guillotine dropping that says, okay, MDEP is out, it's available, it's GA, it's public. Microsoft is not certifying anything else on Teams if it's not on MDEP, and that's going to be the first checkpoint, which is, okay, give us the list of everything that's the MTR on Android. I guess it's still called that, right? MTROA or whatever it is. Everything MTROA that is certified, nothing new comes onto that list unless it's MDEP past that point. And then
so my understanding is net new OEMs at the moment. So if you're a net new, bearing in mind we've got a lot of Android OEMs in play for Teams.
Like easier to list the companies that aren't making
exactly. So if anybody new now is coming to the party, they have to come with MDEP. I believe the existing OEMs, certainly for now, if not forever, and that's obviously debatable, can continue to run their flavor of Android if they prefer, or MDEP, or a mix. They could do some devices with MDEP, some without, depending on what they want to do. But that's the current understanding.
Well, that was the second checkpoint that I've heard some people say, and I've had Ilya said when we spoke to him as well, which is at some point in the future, no team certification is forever. They all expire after a certain point in time and need to be recertified, and those recertifications are going to need to be on MDEP. So, obviously we're not even past the first checkpoint. We still don't have the GA of the product, but that's kind of the two checkpoints that we're looking at. One is all net new OEMs, and the next one is all recertifications. So at some point, it's Microsoft's desire, at least, to move everybody toward this piece. And what we're going to need to do, I'm going to say you and I, but I mean everybody in the analyst and observer community, is we're going to need to list these endpoints that are coming off of certification, because they're the ones that are going to be at risk of
So Microsoft, we watch this really carefully. So I'm always posting on LinkedIn when the new device is added or updated. And Microsoft keep a public list, and the way the certification works is Microsoft give each Android flavor, so 9, 10, 11, 12, 5 years certification window plus 2 years kind of reasonable endeavor support. So obviously your device wouldn't be on the new Android day one, so you might come in year 2 or even year 3. So you've got that period of time. Then you as an OEM have to put a newer build on and recertify, and you'll get your new window. So conceptually, Microsoft could say now for the new build you need MDEP, or for a brand new device you need MDEP. But it's definitely, as you say, a very fixed window that at some point Android 10, Android 11 go end of certification, and it's on the OEM to recertify with a later OS.
But is the date tied to the version of Android, or is the date tied to the certification of the actual device from the OEM?
The date is tied to the version of Android. So if you certify with Android 11 right at the end of the window, your certification period will be very, very short, because you're about to hit the end of when, and the logic is Microsoft think that Android version is safe and patched and maintained for about 5 years between when it comes available and when it's released. They want to nudge everybody up to the next version because now it's more secure, more maintained, etc.
And the current version is 12, right?
That's right. Yeah, I think it's 13 imminent or about, but 12 is definitely the kind of mainstream. And Microsoft keep moving the dates around. Actually, I think 13 is out now as well. But you can kind of plan this based on, if you look back at the Google, Android open source project release date plus 5 years, and then 2 years where Microsoft say, look, we're going to do our reasonable endeavors to keep that supported. So you've got longer if your OEM chooses not to recertify, or they can't because they bought a chipset that doesn't go to N+1, N+2. And that's really important for the audience here, is understanding when you're buying Android devices, how committed is your OEM to updating it, and what chipset have they chosen as to how far they can go in terms of next versions.
Okay. So we're going to need to keep an active list, not just of who is certified, but who may be coming off certification, who's on what version and things like that. I mean, we're going to have to kind of create a golden list of the back end as opposed to the front end, which is what we've been doing, I think.
Yeah, and it's something customers are struggling to understand, because a lot of them come from the older video world where things would run for years and years and years, and we didn't think so carefully about the operating system or like the longevity of that. They were almost considered isolated devices, whereas now everything's interconnected with the cloud, as we said earlier. So keeping reasonably up to date is important from a security compliance standards base.
There is the other side of that, which we kind of went into when we were talking about the CrowdStrike. And I'm going to be completely honest with you. I'm a guy that hates updating, because if everything works and update is the most reasonable, Occam's razor, it's the most reasonable thing to shut things down.
Yeah.
I'm looking at a Windows 7 PC, a Windows 10 PC here, and a Windows 11 PC here. And I'm fine with all three of them. The only thing I don't like on any of them is the McAfee toast that you can't stop anymore. It just keeps popping up. It's odd that you have virus protection and you have viruses from a virus protection that it keeps popping up.
Yeah.
But Southwest Airlines here in the U.S., I don't know if you read the story. It was on Yahoo, and you can just search for it. I'm not going to share a link. I don't want to embarrass anybody. But while all the airlines in the U.S. were shutting down because of CrowdStrike last week and the week after, Southwest was still flying. And the reason they were still flying is they're still running Windows 3.1, which is insane, but makes the point that essentially viruses and hackers are really just going after the most popular systems out there. So, the reason why you're not seeing viruses on Linux or Apple is because not enough people are running Linux or Apple. Not enough people are running Windows 3.1. They were fine. They had no issues with it, which is insane to me, but that's how they kept in the air.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? There's the case to make of, like you say, there's two things there. So one is, like, if my system is all working, is the patch worth the risk? And the other one is, if you're running old or obscure stuff, are you less likely to be hit? I think Apple and Linux have been much better at locking down their systems. Apple particularly hardcore lockdowns. It's harder. I think they're a big enough target these days, particularly if you think about iPhone. Like, hackers would love to exploit that. I'm sure that gets hammered. But it's an interesting case to be made. The reality is, with security threats, even if you're running obscure releases, various compliance laws these days say you have to be up to date. So one way or another, this is how our industry works now. But it's definitely interesting. I think the key thing is, again, phasing, which vendors do you trust, where do you place your bets? It's the same old questions.
I'll tell you one funny story as we start to close this out. And this is obviously a topic we're going to keep talking about and thinking about. I'll certainly love to speak with you some more about it and get some real case studies about what's going on in the world once MDEP actually gets out there. But, funny story in my career, when I was working in financial services, one of the things that I was responsible for, and I'm going to be careful not to name names here, although honestly, the company doesn't exist anymore, so it doesn't matter. But I was responsible for some of the digital signage that was facing the Times Square district in Manhattan, which, by the way, is a requirement for the buildings in that area. You have to have a certain percentage of kinetic signage in order to have it. And I was the guy responsible for the biggest sign at the time in the world, the largest, number of pixels, and it was running beautifully. And I resisted updates. I resisted internet connections. The worst scenario in my mind that I could think of would be somebody hacking into that room and putting, some bad language up on the sign that's in the middle of Times Square that is something that gets the company in trouble. So I said, this room's an island, everything works, it's got a backup, stay away, lock it down, I'm not doing any updates. And 1 year, one of the updates to what was a Windows operating system at the time, was also Silicon Valley, we've Barney boxes up there, big purple refrigerators that don't exist anymore. But one of the updates changed the time and date for daylight savings time change. So on a Sunday morning, the big clock in the front of the building was wrong, as if nobody updated it. And that's one of the downsides of having that room locked down, because the Windows update changed the operating system to know that the date for daylight savings time has changed. So obviously my phone rang and there were 4 hours in the morning on a Sunday morning that the clock was wrong on front of the building. But believe it or not, that was one of the reasons why I was transferred to another department at the company. And somebody else, they gave that as the excuse. Well, that's why we need to lock this down and put it as part of IT. And it's like, no. The answer was, it was my lack of vision to know that by keeping it as an island, it wouldn't get that critical date update. You only make that mistake once in life.
So what I'm hearing from this story is IT people are safe, whether it's all automatic or all manual. We're always going to have something to do.
There's always a job for us out there to fix it. And I won't tell you the story when I was working for the radio station, where we had the same thing, where it's the first ever digital radio station. And as soon as we hit 2 a.m. on the time that we were doing, it went back to 1 a.m. And then when we hit 2 a.m., it went back to 1 a.m. again. And they kept doing that all night until we manually changed the times on the machines. And that stopped happening. That was another Windows build error. So, you get both sides of the same coin. You can't, what do they say? You can't make a system foolproof because fools are so ingenious, or something like that. But in any case, we will keep watching this MDEP. Do you have any stories or last words about this, or do you think we kind of covered it well?
No, I think we've covered it well. I mean, if people are interested in getting to the weeds, I had Yoav Barzilai, who's one of the product managers for MDEP, for collaboration on the Teams Insider podcast. So he kind of gave his perspective, and he's from the MDEP team. So if people want to jump into that, it's teamsinsider.show. But as you say, David, let's jump on again, maybe when Jabra have got their device out and Yealink have got their devices out, and we can see what impact it's making.
Yeah, well, Jabra would have to send me a device, and Yealink would have to return my email. So those are two different things. But in any case, Tom, it's always a pleasure chatting with you. We will do it again, and we'll be talking about the subject as we go forward. Thank you. How can people reach out to you if they need you?
Oh, yeah, LinkedIn's the obvious place, definitely. And it's empowering.cloud for all the community content and research.
Terrific, Tom. Thanks very much. And thank you very much for watching us this week. I'm David Danto. I appreciate you joining us as always. We'll see you next week.